For as long as humans have recorded their triumphs and their tragedies, one idea has quietly shaped the fate of nations. Not armies. Not inventions. Not kings. A promise. A promise to pay later. Debt is one of humanity's most brilliant inventions and its most devastating illusions. And every time an empire believed it had mastered this illusion, the illusion mastered them. So today, we follow a pattern almost too large to see, a recurring loop hidden across 3,000 years, how debt, simple, invisible, and trusted, became the poison that toppled civilizations that once believed themselves invincible. Because the real question isn't why ancient empires fell. The real question is why they all fell the same way. And what this means for us now. Debt begins innocently. It always does. A farmer borrows grain until harvest. A merchant borrows silver to fund a caravan. A city borrows to build walls or roads. A ruler borrows to fight wars they cannot afford to lose. Yet beneath every loan is the same quiet assumption that tomorrow will be bigger than today. That there will be more harvests, more trade, more taxes, more time. Debt is a wager on the future. And empires are built on the belief that their future is guaranteed. But no empire has ever beaten the mathematics of compounding promises. To understand this, we must go back to one of the earliest known financial systems, Mesopotamia. There, in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, debt was not merely an economic tool. It was a way of life. Farmers needed seed. Kings needed soldiers. Temples needed labor. And because there was never enough silver in circulation, credit became the currency of everyday life. At first, it worked. Symbols pressed into clay tablets tracked promises made and promises kept. The economy expanded. Surpluses grew. But as harvests failed or wars dragged on, debts mounted faster than they could be repaid. Farmers fell into bondage. Families lost land. Inequality spiraled until the kings themselves feared revolt. So a strange pattern emerged. Every few decades, rulers declared clean slate edicts canceling debts, freeing debtors, and erasing the tablets. These weren't acts of generosity. They were acts of survival. Because the people were drowning in promises they could no longer keep, and the entire system risked collapse. It is one of the earliest warnings recorded in human history. When debt piles high enough, it becomes a political crisis long before it becomes an economic one. And yet, despite thousands of years of warnings, the pattern repeated. Move forward to ancient Athens, the birthplace of democracy, an unlikely place for a debt catastrophe. But democracy wasn't born from philosophical debates or noble ideals. It was born from economic despair. In early Athens, wealthy landowners lent money to poorer farmers at high interest. When harvests failed, the farmers pledged their land. When the land was gone, they pledged themselves. Entire families slipped into debt slavery. The economic pressure hardened into political rage. Rebellion simmered. Athens needed a radical solution, and they found one in a statesman named Solon. He declared sacthea, literally, the shaking off of burdens. Debt slavery was abolished. Land was returned. A new legal system was created to prevent extreme inequality. For a moment, the city stabilized. Freed from crushing debt, the poor gained political power. Freed from fear of revolt, the elite accepted reforms. And out of this fragile compromise grew the foundations of Athenian democracy. But the lesson Athens left behind is not comforting. It shows that debt crises don't just damage economies, they rewrite political systems. When too many promises cannot be fulfilled, societies must choose between upheaval or reinvention. But perhaps no empire illustrates the arc of debt more dramatically than Rome. Rome's power was built on conquest funded by loans. Armies needed food, weapons, equipment. Wars required ships, fortifications, bribes, gifts, salaries. The Roman state, like all states, spent money it didn't yet have, expecting future victories and future taxes to cover the difference. For centuries, it worked. War fed expansion, expansion fed wealth, wealth fed more war. Debt was not a burden. It was a bridge to a larger tomorrow. But as Rome's borders expanded, the cost of maintaining them grew exponentially. More legions, more fortresses, more roads, more salaries, more subsidies. The economy strained. And then, in a slow, grinding shift, the Roman state discovered the ancient temptation that has destroyed countless governments, debasing its currency. At first, it was minor. A silver coin with a little less silver. A temporary measure, they said. A small adjustment. But once they started, they could not stop. Over 2 centuries, the denarius, a coin that once held over 90% silver, fell to barely 2%. Rome wasn't minting money. It was minting promises. Coins that looked the same but meant less. Inflation surged. Soldiers demanded higher pay. Taxes rose. Trade faltered. And as the state became desperate, it squeezed its citizens harder. Farmers fled their lands. Merchants hid their wealth. Local economies fractured. The empire's currency system, the very glue that held together its vast territories, disintegrated. Rome didn't fall because barbarians stormed the gates. Rome fell because it borrowed from the future until the future disappeared. Debt, once a tool of expansion, became poison. And by the time Rome realized it, the antidote no longer existed. We might assume the lesson was learned. It wasn't. Travel to 16th century Spain at the height of its imperial glory. Gold and silver were pouring in from the Americas, mountainous quantities, unparalleled in history. By all accounts, Spain should have become the wealthiest and most stable state in Europe. Instead, it became the first global empire to declare state bankruptcy. Not once. Not twice. But 4 times in just 40 years. Why? Because wealth made Spain reckless. Access to oceans of silver convinced its rulers they could borrow endlessly to fight endless wars. When the wars lasted longer than expected, when the silver shipments slowed, when creditors demanded payment, Spain discovered the fundamental truth of imperial finance. Money can run out. Time can run out. But interest never does. The interest on Spain's debt snowballed until even its imperial treasure wasn't enough. Each bankruptcy shattered the European banking system. Each restructuring weakened the state. And each rescue simply set the stage for the next collapse. Spain learned that wealth cannot protect a nation from the consequences of its own promises. Now move across the world to the Ottoman Empire, once the most powerful empire on earth. For centuries, it expanded through disciplined armies and efficient administration. But in the 19th century, the Ottomans faced a new world, industrialized Europe. Railroads, telegraphs, factories all required enormous investment. The empire wanted to modernize. So it borrowed. And borrowed. And borrowed. European banks extended loans at high interest, confident the empire would always be able to pay. Ottoman leaders believed the same thing. They were, after all, heirs to centuries of power. But modernization did not happen fast enough. Revenues lagged. Debt payments soared. In 1875, after decades of optimistic borrowing, the Ottoman Empire declared it could no longer meet its obligations. Creditors responded by taking control of key Ottoman revenues, customs, salt taxes, tobacco monopolies. For the first time in its long history, the empire lost sovereignty not through war, but through debt. Promises had dissolved its autonomy from within. By now, the pattern should be visible. The actors change, the continents change, the centuries change, but the arc doesn't. Debt begins as a tool. It ends as a trap. And between those 2 points lies a predictable cycle. Optimism. Expansion. Overreach. Shock. Collapse. This cycle is not ancient history. It is alive. Look at the global financial crisis of 2008. Banks lent money on the assumption that housing prices would rise forever. Consumers borrowed on the assumption their incomes would rise forever. Governments borrowed on the assumption their tax revenues would rise forever. It was the same ancient wager, tomorrow will save us. When it didn't, the world discovered how fragile a system becomes when built on promises stacked atop promises. Over $11 trillion in household wealth evaporated. Entire national budgets began to buckle. Millions lost homes, jobs, savings. Nations implemented austerity. Economies contracted. Social trust fractured. The crisis surprised the public. But history wasn't surprised at all. Or look at Japan in the 1990s. A debt-fueled asset bubble inflated real estate and stocks to impossible heights. When the bubble burst, Japan entered what would become known as the lost decades. A prolonged stagnation still felt today. Public debt soared to levels once considered inconceivable for a major economy. Growth froze. Confidence faded. A modern, technologically advanced nation had stumbled into the same trap as its ancient predecessors. And today, the pattern continues at a scale humanity has never attempted. As of recent global estimates, world debt exceeds $300 trillion, several times larger than global GDP. Households, corporations, and governments are intertwined in an unprecedented web of obligations. We live in an age where debt is no longer an economic choice. It is the bloodstream of the entire global system. But history teaches us something unsettling: debt-driven systems don't collapse gradually. They snap. Often because of events no one predicts: crop failures in Mesopotamia, military defeats in Rome, silver shortages in Spain, war debts in the Ottomans, housing markets in 2008, energy shocks, pandemics, political instability. Every empire believes it has engineered a new kind of financial stability. Every empire believes past mistakes do not apply to them. Every empire is wrong. But this story isn't fatalistic. Because beneath the ruins of past civilizations lie lessons powerful enough to change outcomes, if we choose to hear them. The first lesson is that debt becomes dangerous when it grows faster than the real economy beneath it. When promises expand faster than productive capacity, farms, factories, trade routes, innovation, the system becomes a tower built on hope. That tower always falls. The second lesson is that transparency is survival. Empires that acknowledged financial reality, early Athens under Solon, certain Chinese dynasties that reset land and tax structures, survived their crises. Those that hid the truth, manipulated currency, or delayed correction fell suddenly and violently. The third lesson is perhaps the most important: economic collapse is rarely just economic. Debt crises rearrange societies. They transform politics. They destabilize governments. They ignite social movements. They reveal truths of power that had been obscured. When enough people lose faith in the system's promises, the system itself dissolves. So where does this leave us now? We stand in a world more interconnected, more indebted, and more dependent on future growth than any civilization before us. The promises we have made public, private, financial, political are vast. Some are wise. Some are not. Some will be fulfilled. Many will not. History does not tell us what will happen next. But it tells us what always happens when debt is ignored. Maybe the future will bring innovation powerful enough to support the weight of our promises. Maybe it will bring a reckoning. Maybe the cycle will repeat in ways we can already feel forming beneath the surface. What we do know is this: no empire, ancient or modern, collapses because of a single event. Collapse begins with a series of small, comfortable decisions made by people who believed consequences were far away. The story of debt is the story of human belief, our faith in tomorrow, our desire for more, our hope that risk can be delayed. But promises, once poisoned, demand payment. And history always collects. If you found these insights worth thinking about, feel free to share your thoughts, your questions, or your own theories in the comments. And if you want to explore more hidden patterns behind the rise and fall of civilizations, consider subscribing. There are many more stories buried in the past, stories that might help us understand the future.